Mr. President, Mr. Premier, distinguished guests from the United States, and friends. It is a very great pleasure, Mr. President, to welcome you to Canadian soil, as I have been welcoming you to Canadian airspace, and especially happy because this is the occasion of the ratification of a treaty which will benefit both our countries and which is the result of friendly cooperation between them. It is, I think, appropriate that your first visit as President outside the United States should be to Canada. Your nearest neighbor, your closest friend, and naturally, therefore, your most candid and constructive critic. It is the accepted convention that the first official visit of the head of a state or the head of a government to another country should be to the capital of that country. But you, Mr. President, are a Texan, and as such, not bound by conventions, at least that kind of convention. So your first visit to Canada and your first visit as President outside the United States is to British Columbia and to Vancouver, where you are being greeted today by Premier Bennett and other distinguished citizens of this province. It is fitting, I believe, that this should be the case, and it is a recognition of the surge of Canadian development, west and north, and of our interest and our destiny across the Pacific. In no part of Canada could your welcome be more sincere than in this great province. But I assure you, Mr. President, that had you landed at our most eastern airport in Newfoundland, 5,000 or more miles away, or at any place between, our welcome to you would have been equally warm, both for yourself and as President of the United States of America. The nation which bears today so much of the burden of ensuring peace and promoting freedom in the world, the nation which has led the free world through these troubled post-war years, the nation that is our good friend and our good neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, Premier Bennett, honorable ministers and members of Parliament, citizens of British Columbia, my fellow Westerners. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would indulge me just a moment, I should like to introduce to our Canadian friends the distinguished Americans who've come with me today to participate in this most enjoyable occasion and to commemorate this day. First of all, I should like to ask the distinguished chairman of our Foreign Relations Committee of the United States Senate, Senator J. William Fulbright, to stand. And his wise and beloved colleague, Senator George Aiken, a great friend of Canada. From our neighboring state of Montana, we have the great Majority Leader of the United States Senate, Mike Mansfield. His colleague, our friend Senator Lee Metcalf, and Governor Babcock. From Oregon, we have Senator Morse. distinguished member of the Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Newberger. The fine young governor of Florida, governor of Oregon, Governor Hatfield. Governor, I hope you'll pardon me because I was in Florida yesterday and I'm going to be in Oregon tomorrow. From the state of Washington, we have Senator Warren Magnuson, Senator Henry Jackson, and Governor Rossellini. It's on rare occasions that we have a quorum of the Senate here in the middle of the afternoon, but it looks like that. From the great state of Nevada, we have Senator Alan Bible, Senator Howard Cannon, and Governor Grant Sawyer. And my own distinguished Secretary of the Interior, Mr. Stuart Udall. Mr. Prime Minister and Mr. Premier, I want to thank you for your generous welcome. This trip to Vancouver is the first that I've taken outside of my own country since I became president last November. I think I will be guided by an old Chinese proverb. When you enter a country, inquire as to what is forbidden. When you cross a boundary, ask about the customs. Well, I have made careful inquiries, and I will eat the salmon and praise the BC lions. It is appropriate that this first trip should be to Canada. Our ties are old, and they are strong. We are at once neighbors and friends and partners and allies. And I am very glad my first stop is Vancouver. Here is that spirit of adventure and excitement, of building a nation, which is part of the West, which is my home also. I won't say that Vancouver reminds me of Texas. I will say, though, when I go home, that Texas reminds me of Vancouver. Your Prime Minister has said that the great purpose of international statesmanship today must be to make possible a better life for all. Well, that is the purpose of this visit. The treaty we proclaim will lay a new foundation of prosperity for Canadians and Americans, for your West and for ours. We have achieved this partnership because we respect our differences. This continent is a richer and freer place for that respect. At the same time, we owe much to each other. We can never forget that the rich soil of American freedom has been washed with Canadian bloodshed in a common effort against foreign enemies. Nor can we forget that you have an honest interest in our affairs. We will always stand with you in the defense of freedom. But I also tell you that in the years to come, my country will spare no effort to achieve a lasting peace for all of us. I hope to learn more about your country. I hope to encourage my people to discover more of the richness of your culture, the values of your people, and the promise of your destiny. But this much we already know. No nation in the world has had greater fortune than mine in sharing a continent with the people and the nation of Canada. And now, in the midst of a great drought in Texas, we welcome this great rain here.
Johnson, as he replied to a welcome by the Prime Minister of Canada, Lester B. Pearson, at the Vancouver International Airport just 30 minutes ago. The scene now is the 49th parallel, the international boundary that marks Canada and the United States. We are at Peace Arch Park, which is bounded on the west by the great waters of Semiahmoo Bay that flow into the Puget Sound to our left and surround those beautiful San Juan Islands that sit off the coast of the state of Washington and flow north into the Strait of Georgia and the tranquil islands that are the Gulf Islands. To our north is, of course, the Canadian Customs House that sits on a knoll above us. We are sitting at the bottom of a depression that forms the westernmost boundary to the 40-acre park known as the International Peace Arch Park. This is international property, and the international flavor is here today. About 30 feet from where I am sitting on a platform facing the official platform, and behind that official platform is the great Peace Arch at Blaine, Washington, and the international border itself. A 67-foot high steel and concrete structure that is painted white and facing, we are facing north back into Canada. Behind us, of course, the customs and immigration houses of the United States. They are on the top of a knoll to the south of us, and so we are down in the bottom of this depression. We're just now waiting for the cavalcade to arrive from the international airport, bearing the President and the Prime Minister and the other official dignitaries. The bands here in attendance today are made up of bands from the Royal Canadian Navy, HMCS Naden from Esquimalt, under the direction of Lieutenant Tudor E. Jones, the U.S. Army Band from Fort Lewis, Washington. This U.S. Army Band is directed by Commissioned Officer, or Commissioned Warrant Officer, Zoller. We also are being entertained by two young bands. The Bellingham High School Band has been invited under Dr. Clifford Leedy, and they are playing now. We hope later on in the program to hear from the Blaine High School Band, who is on hand under the direction of Weldon Richardson. There are some 10 to 15,000 people here today. The skies continue to lower. Out in the bay, the Semiahmoo Bay, which means half moon in the Indian language, that was the language of the Indians that first frequented this area. They were called the Semiahmoos, the half moon people. I can see red lights that are warning ships' beacons because the day is gray and heavily overcast. There's a brisk south wind blowing, and the flag of the United States, the stars and stripes that surmounts the Peace Arch facing into the United States area, is blowing briskly in the wind, as is the Union Jack, which is on the northern corner of the top of the arch. This Peace Arch was built in 1921. It's a beautiful arch. The work was started in 1920, and workmen from both sides of the line labored side by side with only one motive in mind: completing a monument which might ever stand for a high degree of skill and the closest ties of companionship. They tell us that 3,500 sacks of cement, a mixture of sand and gravel, made more than 800 cubic yards of concrete, and this is tied together with 50 tons of tension steel. This is the only arch of its type, a massive structure that is almost as wide as it is high. And engraved across the face of the arch at the top of the American side, which we can see, are words, "Children of a common mother." And on the other side, facing Canada, are the words, "Brethren dwelling together in unity." In the interior of the arch are two gates. These gates have never been closed. And over one, in carved letters of wood, appears this statement: "Open 100 years, 1814, 1914. And over the other, emblazoned upon the wall, this great hope expressed: "May these gates never be closed." The arch was built to dedicate this 100 years of peace between the United States and Canada, 1814 to 1914, and it also commemorates the Rush-Bagot Agreement, entered into by His Majesty the King, who was then George III, and the President Monroe in 1817, by virtue of the provisions and spirit of which the whole line from the Bay of Fundy to the Straits of Juan de Fuca has been ungarrisoned and unfortified for more than 100 years. We've seen some outriders from the RCMP. I might assure you, and Telford can qualify this statement, that the place is literally crawling with security. Telford?
Absolutely, Len. From the time we left Vancouver this morning, we could follow the highway all the way down through the Dease Tunnel, and I may assure the listeners that the tunnel was being given a thorough check. All the what they call emergency escape hatches in the tunnel that goes under the south arm of the Fraser River were being checked, both by Army security men, by members of the RCMP, the United States Secret Service, FBI, and what have you. There were security checks all the way down this freeway to the International Peace Arch. Here, members of the press, the radio and television, engineers, cameramen, and so on, have been asked continually for their press identification cards, so that there is absolutely no chances being taken whatsoever. We've noticed up here on the road leading into the Peace Arch that there are 40 soldiers. They call them street liners. I would hardly call them a guard of honor or an honor guard. I notice they have now come to the attention, 40 members from the Canadian and United States Army. And you can hear the cry going up now as the motorcycle outriders come in, followed by the official limousines. And it looks as though they are going to come right around, very much closer than we were briefed on, to this marvelous Peace Arch.